guys, welcome to A Push with Lennox, and today we're continuing our discussion about the colonial region, and we're going to be focusing primarily on the New England region today, the northernmost point of the 13 colonies. Now, when we look at the New England region, we're going to see that it is completely different than the Chesapeake or Southern region. If you remember correctly, the Chesapeake region included the colonies of Virginia and Maryland, and they were founded primarily for economic reasons. Yes, I know that Maryland was established as a haven for English Catholics, but that was not the predominant reason it was founded. It was founded because of the fertile soil, the access to coastal ports, and the fact that John Rolfe had introduced this new crop in the early 1600s called tobacco that was making a lot of money. We're also going to see the transformation of labor systems in the Chesapeake colonies. We started off using indentured servants, but as that progresses and as we get into some conflicts such as Bacon's Rebellion, African slaves are going to be the predominant labor force in the Chesapeake and then later the southern colonies. Now, in New England, it's founded for different reasons. It's a religious motivation that drives people to New England. You're going to have not just male settlers like you see in the Chesapeake, but you're going to see families, males and females, going into these colonies hoping to establish not only just a settlement, but a home for their people, if you will. And they're not going to be reliant on cash crops because they don't have the same geographical features that they have in the Chesapeake. They don't have a real rich soil. They actually have rocky soil, so it's difficult to grow things there. But they do have a lot of timber. And so what you're going to see happening in the New England region is it's going to evolve to become a supplier of raw materials such as lumber and fishing and whale oil, and they're going to build ports, and so trading is going to become center to the New England economy as time progresses. You really need to know the differences between these two regions. When we talk about the New England colonies, we have to first talk about the Pilgrims. I think for the most part, that's what most people are familiar with when you talk about colonization of America. And the Pilgrims are going to come out of this time period called the Protestant Reformation, where there was a challenge to the Roman Catholic Church throughout Europe. And that challenge went into England as well. And what we're going to see happen under King Henry VIII, we're going to see the English Anglican Church is going to be formed. And from that, you're going to have challenges to the authority of the church in England. Now, what King Henry VIII did is when he formed the Anglican Church, he basically disavowed the Pope and the Roman Catholic Church. He created this Anglican Church, which really wasn't that far off from Roman Catholic practices. And he basically said, I am the supreme leader of this church. Well, what that's going to set off over the next, 60 years or so is as the monarchy changed in England, as we went from Henry VIII to Queen Mary, I believe, to Queen Elizabeth, to, I'm drawing a blank on the names, to King James. Depending on where they stood religiously, that's where the country went. I believe it was under Queen Elizabeth I that they went back to the Roman Catholic Church. But then under King James, during the colonization period, they come back to the Anglican Church. And with the king and the monarchy as the supreme leader of the church, you actually are putting people in a position where they have to choose between their faith and their leader. And so you're going to start to see reform practices coming out of the Church of England. And one group that's going to go against it are a group of people known as the Separatists. They see the problems within the Church of England. They see, we just need to break away from it. We don't want anything to do with it at all. And so you're going to see a small group of these people, these Separatists, leave England and go to the Netherlands, where they could practice their faith freely. Well, what happened is over in the Netherlands, they found that their children were starting to embrace Dutch traditions and the Dutch culture, and they still wanted to hold on to their English traditions. So they left the Netherlands, they come back, and they're actually going to get a charter for a colony over in the New World. Now, they are going to be chartered by the Virginia Company, the same company that chartered Jamestown. And so they're going to set sail on the Mayflower, and they're going to arrive in the New World. The problem is when they arrive, they went off course. They don't land in the territory that was controlled by the Virginia Company. And that's going to lead to a little bit of a descent aboard the Mayflower. If you look at the map there on the right of the screen, you can see the outlined area that was the territory controlled by the Virginia Company. If you look, the Pilgrims landed just north of there on Cape Cod. Well, when they landed there, you only had about, I think there's like a little over 104 people on this ship. Only 41 of them were Separatists. So you had others who were saying, you know what, we don't need to follow any of the rules of the Virginia Company because we're not on their land anymore. People, specifically William Bradford, are going to say, oh no, we can't start this community without a form of law. And if our laws are not going to be controlled by the Virginia Company, by that charter that we have, then we need to create our own. And that was the basis of the Mayflower Compact. The Mayflower Compact was drafted in 1620, before they even got off the ship. And what it did was it established self-government in the Plymouth colony. They still swore their allegiance to the king, but they said, we're going to rule ourselves, and that rule is going to be based on majority. Whatever is good for the majority is how it's going to go for the entire colony. So really, this is one of the first times that you start to see an official, formal self-government in play in the English colonies. Now, like I said, William Bradford is the guy who kind of brought all this together, and he is going to serve as the governor of the Plymouth colony for almost 30 years. Now, what they do is once they get off and form their colony, their territory, they're going to divide up all the land amongst the settlers equally. But they're not going to be, they're not prepared. I mean, there's an old video that I saw where it talked about one guy on the Mayflower. What he packed was something like 40 pairs of shoes, but they didn't bring any seeds or farming equipment or anything like that. So they were completely unprepared to survive in the New World. Fortunately for them, there was a Wampanoag, more specifically a Pawtuxet Native American by the name of Massasoit. You probably know him as Squanto. And Squanto and his friends are going to teach the Pilgrims how to survive in this colony. And they're going to have a pretty good relationship. As the colony grows, as they're still being governed by the Mayflower Compact, William Bradford takes on this role as the governor, and he was like a hands-on governor. He met with each and every person in the colony. He would, if people had a concern, they knew they could come to him and talk to him, and he kept doing that until the population grew too big for him to do it. It just got to be too much for him to go and talk to everybody or hold meetings where everyone had a chance to be heard. That's when, in the Plymouth colony, they're going to create the General Court. The General Court was a legislative body in which the towns within Plymouth are going to select representatives to go meet with William Bradford and voice any concerns or any problems that they have so he can address it. So we're starting to see a representative style of government, similar to what's going on down in Virginia with the House of Burgesses. Eventually, the Plymouth colony is going to be absorbed into the Massachusetts Bay colony. I don't know if they just both grew so big they just became one unit, but the Plymouth colony will kind of disappear and they'll just become part of the Massachusetts Bay colony. And let's talk about that. Massachusetts Bay colony is going to be founded in 1630. Now, this group of people, who came over from England are known as Puritans. Now, Puritans are a little bit different than the Separatists that we see with the Pilgrims. The Puritans, as members of the Church of England, saw problems with it, and they said, we want to fix those problems, so we want to purify the church. Funny story. The Puritans first started having trouble with the Church of England over the question of what the ministers were supposed to be wearing. There had been this long-standing tradition that ministers were supposed to dress very formally and stuff, and then there was a shift, and they started dressing more casually, and the Puritans were like, oh, no, no, we can't have any of that. They must be more formal. And that's kind of the beginning of the Puritan faith. But I digress. Let me come back to the colonies. The Puritan they're going to come in and they're going to be basing their economy similar to the Pilgrims. They're going to be a commercial fishing venture. They're also later going to bring fur trapping and stuff in, but primarily fishing is what they're going to make their money on. John Winthrop is the very first governor, and he will serve as governor for 20 years. Now, they're going to settle in what we consider the Boston area, so they're the ones who settled Boston with 1,000 people. This is a big group of people coming over, and they initially called it the Puritan Plantations. One thing that they are very famous for that we're going to talk a lot more in class about, but if you're not in my class, you're just watching this, you want to really look at this speech called the City on a Hill speech. This was John Winthrop's plea to his people, to the people of Massachusetts Bay, saying, we're being watched, we're under the spotlight, and people are looking to our colony to see if we succeed or if we fail. And we must succeed, because if we don't, it's going to make God look bad. And so we have to do that. And the City on a Hill speech is going to spur what's known as the Puritan work ethic. The Puritan work ethic has three parts. It consists of hard work, discipline, and frugality. And the idea behind the Puritan work ethic is we are all working to build this colony, to build our community, and we're working with the same goal in mind. And this idea is going to help this community grow. Now, they're going to be different from the Pilgrims in that they're not going to be reliant on Native American help. Now, they will trade with the Native Americans, and that will last for a while, but that will eventually digress into a hostile relationship, and you'll see things like the Pequot War and King Philip's War evolve out of their relationship with the Native Americans. And if you're interested in that, there's another video I did. It's called the Virginia and the Native Americans, but I talk about the relationship between Native Americans and the settlers of the Massachusetts Bay region. The success of the Puritan colony is going to draw more colonists in. And when we get into about, I think, the 1640s, 1650s, we're going to see what's known as the Great Migration. The Great Migration of the 1600s focuses on 25,000 Puritans moving into and around the Massachusetts Bay colony. So this is a successful colony. We're not seeing the challenges being faced anymore by early colonies like we saw in Jamestown or we saw in Plymouth. We're seeing, new colonies being formed and having success, rather quickly. Real quick, I threw out two terms to you, Puritans and Separatists. There is a distinct difference between the two. First of all, Puritans wanted to purify or clean up the Church of England, get it running properly in their mind. Whereas Separatists said, no, this idea that the king and the monarchy are controlling the church, we don't want anything to do with that. We want to separate from the Church of England. They didn't create this new religion or anything. They're still worshiping in the same way, I guess, the same style and everything. They just didn't think that the monarchy should control the church. What they had in common, though, was they both were committed to Calvinistic ideas and principles. And this term Calvinism is one you need to know. And Calvinism refers to the belief in predestination and salvation by faith and not works. Okay? There is this idea that the Puritans, the Pilgrims, came to the New World, came to the colonies for religious freedom. And that is absolutely true. What's interesting, though, is while they came here for religious freedom, the question is, did they give out religious freedom? Did they practice religious freedom? And we'll look at that briefly. One of the foundations of being an American is this term you see right here, individualism. That we all have our own individual beliefs and thoughts, and that we should be able to express those. In the New England colony, you're not really going to see that. In fact, the Puritans under John Winthrop are actually looking for more of conformity, everybody doing the same thing. And so they're not going to offer what we refer to as religious liberty or religious freedom. Like I said, John Winthrop, the governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, set up a religious commonwealth. And what that meant was you had to be a member of the church to participate in politics of the community. They would hold town hall meetings, and those became very important because what you saw in these town hall meetings was an example of direct democracy. Everybody who was part of that had a voice, and everyone's voice was equal. So people would, everyone would vote on every single issue. But remember, you had to be part of the church, and of course you had to be a man in order to participate in this direct democracy. John Winthrop once said about their community, we must be knit together in this work as one man. He's taking this idea of the Puritan work ethic and he says we're all working towards the same goal. We must work as one, not as individuals. So this idea that is so important to Americans today about individualism did not exist in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Not everyone agreed with that. There were a couple religious dissenters, people who went against this idea. Their names were Roger Williams and Ann Hutchinson. I'll talk about them real briefly. Roger Williams was a separatist minister, and he believed in liberty of conscience, meaning you should have the freedom to make your own decisions about what you believe. And he absolutely said that the civil authority, the government, should not enforce any form of religious practices, or should a government support a state church. They have to be separate. Because remember, the separatists wanted to get away from this idea where the monarchy controlled the church. So why would you want to set it up here in the New World where the church controlled the government? You got to keep them separate. He absolutely believes in individualism. Absolutely. He also kind of challenged the Puritans because the land that they were on, that they chartered, he said that charter is not valid because, quite honestly, this is Native American land and the British government has no authority to give title to that. They don't own it. It'd almost be like if you came in and sold my house and took the money and ran. You don't have the authority to do that. So Roger Williams, because he brought all this to light in front of the Puritan church, they said, see ya, and they banished him. They kicked him out of the colony. And so he's going to go actually start his own colony, known as Rhode Island. He is going to be famously known for the Providence Purchase. Remember I told you he said that English charter was void because they didn't have the right to purchase land? He actually bought land from the Native Americans, and that's how he got the territory that he turned into the colony of Rhode Island. It was officially chartered by the English government in 1644. He didn't want to break away from England. He just wanted to do it what he considered the right way. In Rhode Island, he is going to found the first Baptist church in America. This is in 1638. The church still stands today. So he is like the father of the American Baptist Church. And Baptists are probably the second largest religion in America. I think, don't quote this number, but I believe 15% of Americans designate themselves as Baptists. It is Roger Williams who first talks about a wall of separation between the church and the state. It's right here in this quote, right here, where he says, they've opened a gap in the hedge or a wall of separation between the garden of the church and the wilderness of the world. Here's the thought. If you look at that little chart I have up there on the right, the state, the government, is ruled by majority rules. What the majority of people want, that's what the government does. But the church is run under this idea of liberty of conscience, or freedom, the freedom to make your own choices. If the state and the majority is running the church, then you do not have liberty of conscience. You do not have the freedom to choose your own faith. And that's why Roger Williams and later Thomas Jefferson are going to say we must have a wall of separation between the church and the state. The two cannot mix. Another dissenter, Anne Hutchinson. Boy, she is really going to upset the Puritan leadership where she's going to start conducting home Bible studies. You might say, well, what's the big deal? Bible study, they're Puritans. They should be happy. Except for one thing. She was a woman. And pulling one verse out of context, I suffer not a woman to teach, nor to usurp authority over the man, but to be in silence. Oh, if they just read the whole verse. But that's okay. They are not going to like Anne Hutchinson. Not only that, while she believed in Calvinism and predestination and the elect, she also believed she had a authority to say who was elect and who was not. She believed that she could see, that God had given her a vision to see who were the elect and who wasn't. And she also taught antinomianism, this idea of salvation by grace and faith alone. Works, she said, have nothing to do with salvation. I guess she read the whole verse. Here's the thing. Remember the Puritan work ethic. Puritans judged one another by that ethic. How hard are you working? How disciplined are you? How frugal are you? And Anne Hutchinson said, none of that matters. We are saved by grace, and we're saved by having faith in that grace. So, Anne Hutchinson, see you later. She's going to be banished. And here's what's interesting. 60 people go with her, men and women, her followers. She's going to go to Rhode Island. Eventually, she's going to end up in New York. And unfortunately, Anne Hutchinson has a sad ending where she and her family are going to be attacked by Native Americans and killed. But, her legacy obviously still lasts. I have this quote here that I wrote, that Winthrop's City on a Hill was not an experiment in religious individualism. Yes, the Puritans came and practiced religious freedom from England, but they didn't give religious freedom. They didn't allow individualism. They didn't allow that liberty of conscience. So when we think about religious freedom that we have today, we owe that more to Roger Williams and people like Anne Hutchinson than we do to the Puritans, just because we have that freedom to decide which religion, if any at all, we want to follow. Few other colonies you should be familiar with in the New England region. Call it the rest of the story. Connecticut is also was founded by Thomas Hooker. He is going to draft the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut. This establishes also another representative legislature like we saw in Plymouth, like we will see as Massachusetts Bay grows, like we see in Rhode Island. And so you're going to have a representative legislature and a governor. And they're going to be a charter colony, and they too, notice all of these colonies are being allowed self-government. It's very important that we notice that each colony, as it evolves, is governing themselves, from the House of Burgesses in Virginia to the Mayflower Compact to the town meetings that the Puritans had to now the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut. And then finally, New Hampshire is the last of the New England colonies, was created by Charles II. This is a royal colony, and it was set up primarily for economic, fur trade and stuff like that. All right? So there you have it. That's a lot of information about the New England colonies. I hope you learned something. And like I always say, if you didn't, just rewind and watch the video again. Next up, we're going to talk a little bit about the middle colonies. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.